So this is what happened when the writers of TNG misunderstood Gene Roddenberry's demand for bi representation. This is a review of the Star Trek The Next Generation episode 11001001. If you have not seen this episode and you don't want to know what Riker's holodeck girlfriend has against Dixieland jazz, be warned. Spoilers beyond this point. Before you watch this episode of TNG, make sure you're nice and comfortable, because it won't actually take any longer than any other episode, but it'll feel that way. The Enterprise is pulling into a starbase for some routine maintenance. A team led by this guy, Commander Quinteros, is on the job, but other than Quinteros, the team consists of the Binars, beings who are augmented with computerized implants and process information and communicate with each other in binary, the basic language of computers that reduces all information into sequences of zeros and ones. Upgrading the Enterprise's main computer is the task of these little guys, and, not little guys. The Binars are neither guys nor gals. The Binars are non-binary? Anyway, while the Binars get to work, the rest of the crew is enjoying some recreation time. Picard says to Riker, "I'm going to finish up some work and then read a good book. What about you?" Riker says, "I don't know, I'll probably just spend the first half of the episode walking around and having brief encounters with the rest of the senior staff." And that's what happens. But before he leaves the bridge, Riker notices that the Binars are acting a little strange. They get very nervous and very defensive in response to a basic question like, "Hey, what are you guys doing?" Riker tells Wesley to keep an eye on them. Then Riker runs into Tasha and Worf in the corridor on their way to play a team from the starbase in a game of Parisi squares. Riker's like, "Good luck." And Worf says, "We will return victorious with the blood of the enemy on our lips." Tasha's like, "Haha, he's only joking." And Worf's like, "Wait a few minutes and then ask the motherfucker whose blood I'm drinking if I'm joking." Riker finds Data and Geordi in the observation lounge. Data's trying painting for the first time, with Geordi's guidance. Riker's like, "Hey, look, it's the blind leading the bland." Data's like, "Come on, it's the first season, we're all pretty bland." "Still works! I'm out, suckers!" Riker drops by sickbay, where Dr. Crusher is busily packing some things and getting ready to head over to the starbase. "I'm going to meet with Professor Terrence Epstein, the leading authority on cybernetics," she says. "I have an idea for how to use cybernetics to help with regeneration, and for years I've wanted to check it against his research. I can't wait to see what's in those Epstein files." Two of the Binars are working on the holodeck when Riker walks by. They announce that they've just upgraded it and invite Riker to try it out. Riker asks the computer for a jazz club in New Orleans, circa 1958, and it complies. He also asks for an audience, a nice, intimate audience of one. After clicking through a couple of different women, he lands on this one, Minuet, who immediately starts eye-fucking him from the bar. Riker's like, "Excuse me, NB pals," to the Binars and walks over to Minuet. He says to Minuet, "Tell me you love jazz." And she replies, "I love all jazz, except Dixieland." Riker's like, "Why not Dixieland?" And she says, "Because you can't dance to it." And let me just stop you right there, Minuet. And Riker, who fails to disagree with this bullshit opinion, "But the thing is, you can dance to Dixieland." I mean, I can't, but I can't dance to anything. I've got the rhythm of a dreaming dog's randomly kicking legs. But people who can dance to Dixieland. Back in the late 1910s and into the 20s, when Dixieland jazz first took off, it was the hot form of dance music. That's what people did when Dixieland bands played. They danced to the music. How the fuck are you gonna sit there and say that you don't like Dixieland because you can't dance to it? Also, you love all jazz except Dixieland? One of the earliest and most influential styles of jazz? You're sitting in a jazz club in New Orleans where Dixieland originated? And you love all styles of jazz except the one that inspired all the styles that came after it? What are you talking about? It's giving me flashbacks to when I was in college and I was in the computer lab and there was this guy sitting behind me talking on the phone, and he said to the person he was talking to, "I like all music except jazz and blues." What the fuck? You like all music? All music Except the two genres that are the foundation of the rest of modern popular music, you belong in a prison. Anyway, her misinformed bullshit opinions on music aside, Minuet seems nice, I guess. Riker certainly likes her. She likes him too. She tells Riker that she's been waiting for him. On the bridge, Wesley walks up to Commander Quinteros and says, "Can I ask you a question about the Binars?" And Quinteros says, "Why don't you ask them? That way you won't be talking to me." So Wesley asks the Binars about the high-pitched sound they make when they communicate with each other. The Binars explain that it's their language, and they're capable of processing information at incredibly high speeds thanks to their computerized fanny packs. Wesley's like, "How interesting." Picard walks up and says, "Hey, where's Riker?" Wesley says, "He's in the holodeck." Picard's like, "Awesome, I'm gonna go cockblock him." Riker plays the trombone with the jazz trio on stage at the club. He thanks the band, and the piano player is like, "Nothing to it. Now finish up your business because I got another gig to get to tonight. It's a real fancy costume party at a mansion out in the country. There's a password and everything. Fidelio. And they want me to play blindfolded." Minuet asks Riker for a dance before he goes, and they dance and kiss. And then Picard walks in like, "Oh, hey, sorry to interrupt." Only not really. Minuet, who has been laser focused on Riker this whole time, now suddenly seems interested in Picard as well. She speaks to him in French, then flatters him, then gets him a glass of wine. Like Riker, Picard is amazed at the sophistication of Minuet's program. On the bridge, Wesley notices something potentially dangerous happening in engineering. The magnetic field that contains the ship's supply of antimatter is starting to fail. He calls Geordi and Data, who head to engineering, and confirm the problem. They can't fix it, which means that in another 4 minutes, antimatter containment will be lost, which will immediately trigger an explosion that will destroy the ship. With no time to lose, Data orders all personnel to abandon ship. When everyone else is left, Data sets the Enterprise's autopilot to take it a safe distance from the starbase, and then Data and Geordi leave as well. When they meet up with Tasha, Worf, Dr. Crusher, and Commander Quinteros on the starbase, they notice a few odd things. First, nobody has seen Picard or Riker, which means they must still be on the Enterprise. And second, once the Enterprise cleared the starbase, its magnetic antimatter containment field spontaneously regenerated, and the ship turns and zooms away at warp speed. In the holodeck jazz club, Minuet is still holding the attention of Riker and Picard. "She's so intuitive," Picard says. "I know," says Riker. "She's the woman I've waited for all my life. Someone who will do and say exactly what I want her to." Picard's like, "Well, this has been fun, but flirting with beautiful and eager young women is more of a Riker thing. I'm gonna go read a book." But Minuet insists that he stay. She insists so hard that it seems like she's trying to keep him here. Keep them both here. Picard calls for the exit, and he and Riker realize for the first time that the ship has been evacuated and is now on course for the Binar homeworld. Somehow, while they were in the holodeck, they were cut off from everything that happened. The first order of business is to take back control of the ship. Wait, scratch that. The first order of business is to go to engineering and set the auto-destruct. Riker's like, "Wait, what?" And Picard says, "Yes, we know nothing about the specifics of the situation we're in, so the first thing we should do is tell the ship to blow itself up in a few minutes if we can't figure out what's going on. It's straight out of the Starfleet rulebook." So they set the auto-destruct, then they grab some phasers and beam themselves onto the bridge, where they find the Binars unconscious in a heap next to the aft computer stations. Picard turns off the auto-destruct, and the ship arrives at the Binar homeworld, where things don't look to be going so great. The entire planet, which is controlled by a central computer, is offline, and all the Binars are in an unconscious state like the ones on the Enterprise. And the Binars have transferred a massive amount of information to the Enterprise's computer, but Picard and Riker can't figure out how to access it. The only way they can think of to learn what's going on here is to ask Minuet, who has obviously been programmed for some purpose by the Binars. So they head back to the holodeck, where the jazz club program is still running, And Minuet explains. See, a star in the Binar system went supernova and knocked out their planetary computer system. The Binars backed up their home planet's computer onto the Enterprise's computer, and the only way to save the Binars is to restore their planetary computer using the data that's been saved on the Enterprise's computer. Only Minuet doesn't know which file they need to open in order to start the transfer or anything else useful, so Picard and Riker head back to the bridge. Picard calls the starbase and asks Data how they can access the file they need to restore the Binar's planetary computer. Data's like, you'll need the password. Try Fidelio. Shut the fuck up. Data's like, maybe the password is in binary? So Picard and Riker run a decryption program searching for a binary sequence, and they find it. It's 11001001, which you might notice is also the romantic and deeply evocative title of this very episode. Riker tries to run the 11001001 file, but it doesn't work. Picard guesses that since the Binars always work in pairs, it might help if he opens the file on a second computer terminal. So he does, and that works, and within a few seconds, the Binars planet is back online, and the Binars on the Enterprise are awake. The Binars thank Picard and Riker for their help and offer to turn themselves in for whatever punishment they've earned for stealing the Enterprise. Picard's like, if you needed our help to fix your planet's computer, why didn't you just ask? To be honest, when we met, you seemed like a dick. They've got you there, sir. You are kind of an asshole in season 1. Picard and Riker return the Enterprise to the starbase, the crew returns, and Picard's like, Riker and I ran this entire ship just fine by ourselves while you were gone, so you're all fired. The Binars are led away by Tasha to face swift and brutal justice for their crime, and Riker turns to Picard like, hey, can I go close that deal with Minuet on the holodeck real quick? Picard's like, sure, man, go bust a nut. But alas, no nuts are to be busted on this day. When Riker enters the holodeck, he finds that Minuet has been replaced by this close but not quite substitute. Sometime later, he returns to the bridge all mopey because he just had to have sex with a different holographic lady than the holographic lady he was hoping to have sex with. He tells Picard, Minuet is gone. I tried every combination of variables in the holodeck's create a girlfriend mode, but none of them was her. Picard's like, I guess she was part of the Binars programming, but you know, number one, I really don't care. And the Enterprise flies off to its next mission, and that's the end of one of the most uneventful episodes of Star Trek ever made. Having said that, I don't hate it. I wouldn't call it good necessarily, but there are things about it which I like, and also a few things that point toward the show that TNG would eventually become following its very rough first season. Before I get to the good stuff, let me dispense with the bad. The pacing of this episode is atrocious, and the main cause of that is how little actually happens. The Binars' plan to steal the Enterprise isn't set into motion until almost halfway through the episode. That's when the containment field crisis forces the ship to evacuate. Almost nothing of importance to the plot happens before that, and very little happens after it. Picard and Riker figure out what's going on, locate a file on the computer, open the file, and that fixes everything. In order to fill out an entire episode with such a meager story, the creators resort to showing us a lot of incidental action that would have been cut out of most other episodes. For example, the Enterprise's arrival at Starbase at the beginning. I get wanting to show it. It's the first time we see the TNG version of this scene, which we've seen a couple of different versions of in the movies to this point. And the shots of the Enterprise pulling into space dock do a good job of communicating the scale of the ship. The Enterprise rarely seems bigger and more majestic and more, ship-like than it does in these shots. But we also get the dry details of Geordi and Data piloting the ship into the starbase, saying lines like, ready to dock, sir, and activating mooring beams, which aren't really necessary except to eat up screen time. We also get to watch Commander Quinteros and his team of Binars board the ship from the starbase in minute detail. instead of just having Picard and Riker walk up to the airlock door and then having Quinteros and the Binars step through, we see Picard and Riker approaching the door, then Quinteros and his team approaching a door from the starbase side, then Quinteros and his team crossing the corridor on the other side of that door, and then finally Quinteros and his team coming through the door that Picard and Riker are standing in front of. You see what I mean? It's like instead of just going straight from point A to point B, the editing takes us through points A, B, C, D, and E. There's a lot of that going on in the episode, stretching things out by showing us far more procedural or incidental detail than we actually need. Beyond the pacing and the lack of incident, there are also some basic problems with the central dilemma of the episode and how it's ultimately resolved, that the episode tries to hustle us past, hoping we won't notice. The idea is that the Binars had to back up the main computer of their home planet onto the Enterprise's computer so that the Enterprise could then restore their home planet's computer after it went offline due to a supernova. My question is, how does that work? The Enterprise doesn't reach the Binar homeworld until the end of the episode, but the data needed to restore the Binar's homeworld computer is already stored in the Enterprise's computer by the time the Enterprise arrives. So where did that data come from? Were the Binars able to transfer it to the Enterprise from their homeworld remotely, like over subspace? If so, why did they need to take the Enterprise to the planet in order to restore the computer? If we assume they didn't transfer the information directly from their planet's computer to the Enterprise, that creates a similar problem. When Minuet explains the situation to Picard and Riker, she makes it sound like the Binars have been planning this operation for a while because they anticipated the star going supernova. Riker says that the Enterprise's computer is the only mobile computer big enough to handle all the information necessary for the restoration. But if that's true, and if we assume the Binars didn't transfer the data directly from their planet's computer to the Enterprise, where were they keeping the data before they transferred it to the Enterprise's computer? And if they were storing the data somewhere else before transferring it to the Enterprise, doesn't that contradict the idea that the Enterprise is the only computer big enough to handle it? If instead of either of those scenarios, we assume the Binars only transferred all the data from their planetary computer to the Enterprise when the ship arrived at the planet, which is what I think the episode is suggesting. Riker and Picard notice Binar characters on a screen in engineering, and Picard says that data is being received and stored in the computer. That still doesn't make sense, because the whole reason the Binars are doing any of this is because of a supernova that's going to knock out their planetary computer. If the supernova has already hit by the time the Enterprise reaches the planet, wouldn't that mean the computer is already offline? How could the Binars transfer the data to the Enterprise then? If, on the other hand, the supernova hasn't hit yet when they arrive and the Binars are able to transfer the data before the planetary computer is knocked out, does that mean the supernova hits the planet while the Enterprise is still there? There's no indication in the episode of that. If the supernova does hit while the Enterprise is there, wouldn't the same effect which knocked out the Binar's planetary computer also knock out the Enterprise's computer? When did the Binars transfer the data from their planet's computer to the Enterprise's computer, and when did the supernova that knocked out their planet's computer occur? Those are two very basic questions, and I can't find coherent answers in the episode. Also, Minuet says that the Binars' plan was only to keep Riker in the holodeck while they stole the ship. Picard being there too was just a happy coincidence. But when it's time to transfer the data and restore the computer on the Binar homeworld, it takes both Riker and Picard operating the Enterprise's computer to do it. What was their plan if Picard wasn't there? Could Riker just have opened the file on the second computer terminal himself? I guess. I don't know. I admit I am nitpicking here, and really these problems I'm describing don't hurt the dramatic presentation of the episode all that much, but there's so much open space within that dramatic presentation, so much time where very little of importance is happening, that my mind starts to dwell on these inconsistencies. If that happens after the episode is over, I don't mind. I consider it a point in the episode's favor, that it entertained me enough so that I didn't think about such things while I was watching it. To me, that's a mark of good storytelling. Your story has some plot holes or some things that don't quite make sense, but the audience isn't aware of them because they're so transported by the story. But when I do find myself dwelling on those inconsistencies and those bits that don't make sense while I'm watching the show, that is a problem. That indicates that, for me at least, the creators have failed at their task. They haven't gotten away with it. The creators of 11001001 don't get away with it. However, like I said, I don't hate the episode. Overall, I'm kind of meh on the episode. There are bits of it that I like, mostly during that first half, which is uneventful in terms of plot, but does have some nice character beats. We don't get many of those in season 1. Here, we see some chit-chat between Picard and Riker, giving us a sense of their rapport with each other. We see Riker encountering several of his crewmates and showing us how he relates to each of them. I especially like the scene where Riker finds Geordi and Data painting. The friendship of Geordi and Data is, of course, a thing that will continue and become more important as the series goes on, and painting becomes a recurring hobby for Data. But what I really like about this scene in and of itself is how loose and amiable Riker is. Picard usually gets described as a stiff in season 1, and that's fair, but Riker is a block of wood for the most part too. He almost never exhibits the charm and personality that defines his character starting in season 2. But this scene is an exception. He, Geordi, and Data interact like people who actually know and like each other. They seem relaxed. Riker throws a couple of friendly jabs at the quality of Data's painting and teases them that they should keep notes on this because future scholars are sure to be interested in how a blind man taught an android how to paint. Watching the scene now, knowing how the show eventually turns out, it feels like a preview of who these characters are going to become. It fleshes out Riker's character in other ways, too. His love of jazz, his romantic side, his shameless horniness. Stick a beard on him and he's almost there as the Riker we know and love. This is true of the other regulars as well, though to lesser degrees. Tasha and Worf are headed to the starbase to play a game. Beverly is excited about meeting Professor What's-His-Name. Picard mentions how he's looking forward to relaxing in his cabin with a book. The characterization on the show still has a long, long way to go, but the thumbnail sketches of everyone we get in the first half of this episode at least provide the suggestion that these are real people with lives and interests that go beyond staring at view screens and pushing buttons on computer terminals. Speaking of that, there's something else I appreciate about this episode. For a story that centers on a technologically based crisis, there's very little technobabble. The Binars mostly do their own thing without exposition, and when Picard and Riker need to operate the computer to restore the Binar homeworld at the end, they just kinda do it. They sit down at their consoles and push some buttons, and there's hardly a syllable of made-up future jargon to be heard. Even the problem with the antimatter containment is handled with pretty basic, easy-to-comprehend vocabulary. They don't get any more jargony than magnetic field, and I can follow that without much of a problem. The guest performances are all solid. The various actors who play the Binars seem like they're having a good time, and collectively they give the impression of a strange but likable species. Minuet is played by Carolyn McCormick, who is convincing as the hologram, who is not like other holograms, and gives a good enough performance that I don't even end up holding her fucking bullshit opinions about Dixieland Jazz against her. 11001001 was written by Maurice Hurley and Robert Lewin and directed by Paul Lynch. Hurley was the showrunner for TNG during seasons 1 and 2. His job was to make sure the show fit with Gene Roddenberry's vision, and it seems like everybody who worked on the show hated him, including, eventually, Gene Roddenberry, though that one was probably because Hurley eventually realized that Gene's vision was bullshit that made it really hard to make a compelling drama series. Lewin was a a writer and producer during season 1, who also wrote the episodes Data Lore, The Arsenal of Freedom, and Symbiosis. And Lynch is a veteran TV director with a career that spanned from the late 1960s to the late 2010s, who directed 5 episodes of TNG, including a couple of really good ones, A Matter of Time and The First Duty, as well as 5 episodes during the first season of Star Trek Deep Space Nine. It's a slow, sparse, dull episode, but it does have some good character work in the first half. The Binars are fun, and Minuet makes her mark as the first of several holographic love interests to appear in the franchise. TNG would get better than this, a lot better eventually, and a little better by the end of this first season, but it had already been a lot worse as well, so I don't know, maybe instead of a thumbs up or a thumbs down, I'll call this one a thumbs in the middle. Eh? Non-binary. Those are my thoughts on 11001001. What do you think of this episode? Please share your thoughts with me in the comments. If you'd like to support this channel, and I sure wish you would if you can afford it, you can do so by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Steve Shives, becoming a channel member by clicking the join button, or by making a one-time gift by clicking the thanks button, or via PayPal or Venmo. Links are in the description. Please join me next week as this batch devoted to holodeck episodes continues with a look at another TNG episode and the introduction of another holographic love interest. This one is from Season 3, Booby Trap. See you next time for that. Thanks for watching, and take care, everybody.